Hold up. Pretty good, isn't it? Well, this is the real PS4 Pro version, and the PS4 version is not far off, as I've already covered in my original analysis. But this famous, or now infamous, E3 demonstration from The Last of Us Part 2 from 2018 really set a high benchmark. But obviously, in this modern age of every change means a downgrade, this means that this takes some analysis. And I promised that I would take a look at this particular section, as it is the most impactful, I think, from all the reveals shown so far, because it was the single most impressive. Let's move back and remind ourselves what the 2018 video actually looked like. And this is how it all started, with that infamous stab in the throat, which is still in the game. Now, obviously, going over to in-game gameplay, you see a significant difference on the quality of the models, the characters, and the detail in those jets of blood. But that jugular spray, the stab in the throat, the struggling and the grabbing is all still present. The only difference is this is in-game gameplay with me controlling the camera, and in the one from E3, this was a real-time cinematic moving into gameplay. Now, I discussed this on my analysis of the preview version, but this is really akin to that sequence where it went from a real-time cinematic back into gameplay. And you can see here the quality of the models, the lighting, the materials, the shaders, they're all ramped up. What many people call hero lighting, but it's just lighting that is hand-placed point lights to give the right effect and show off the models and the materials and the detail in the right lighting. This is exactly what that E3 demonstration was. That sequence kicked off with a real-time cinematic, just like this one. So yes, it's not in there, but of course that doesn't mean it couldn't be in there. Of course it could. They've changed their design of the level and how this section plays out. That's all. Again, you can see the animation when we stab the girl in the throat. I know it's gruesome stuff, but it is a game. You can see her eyes stretch, her forehead move, her wincing, all those pain and anguish we saw in the original demo. It's all present multiple times in this game. They really show the terror, pain and anguish that your enemies and all the people you murder throughout the game go through. And that has been carried over to the game all the time. The amount of things that happen in this game dynamically like that really blows me away. Blows me away every time. It's so impressive. So this section is again subtly different. The lighting is different. There's a reduction in light sources on the E3 one to the newer one now. It's much brighter. There's more light sources coming through the trees and everything is illuminated better. And as Ellie walks down here, you can see those two little frogs hopping around. This has been a downgrade. There's now only one frog that I could find at any one time in the game, so that is a shame. But as she moves further down, you see that volumetric fog and that moisture rising from the lakes, and that gives that atmospheric scattering, which gives density and depth to the scene. And you can see the light just impacting and diffusing through that thick layer of fog. And that light billows and blooms around the character and gives that density, which looks excellent. And here, as we move into the actual final game, you can see the quality of the foliage, the distance, the light, the fog. It's all incredibly close. I couldn't quite get the character in the right spots, but there are some other shots here where I'm just showing that all that light, that bloom, and how the light illuminates the floating fog and the alpha effects in the forest are all still present and correct. I just couldn't get this shot lined up. I did try a few times, but unfortunately, I couldn't get them in the right place. But here you can see a good example of the SSR is still in place along with the projected cube maps, and that combination of issues up and down does occur. But the volumetric light reduction and the bloom is very subtle, but it is there, and some of that might be artistic, but some of it may not. But you can see here, once we go back into that reveal, this shot I've lined up almost perfectly. You can see that that addition of the interior light source from the garage is now present, which wasn't on E3. But other than the fog volume reduction across the view, it's subtly reduced, not massively, but reduced. But also the foliage, the characters, the density, and the view distance overall is bigger. So the reduction in volumetrics is likely a combination of artistic style and performance. But comparing them at this level, they are very close indeed, and to the point where that if you're saying this is a downgrade, you're really digging hard, because this is more of a change. There's hardly any difference at all in this shot. And as we work our way up through the mud to the car, the same animation, you see that context sensitive ray cast of a hand touching the car and then walking through into the mud and crawling and jumping over the bar. All of that is exactly the same. And here, as we move into the next section where we see the guy get gutted, or to be more accurate, disemboweled. This is obviously an old torture device from years gone by, hung, drawn and quartered, and obviously executed for his sins, and then he's free. This has changed in the game now, with this section being much earlier on, just as the scene we've just done, and much closer. But you can see running them side by side here. The animation routines and the animation timing sets are all identical, there's no change. And overall, the presentation, the delivery and the visual fidelity is so close that you could argue some of that is just down to artistic changes, and obviously some of it will be down to gameplay options and some of it down to performance tweaks. That is always the case. But in the great scheme of things, it's very, very small. Close enough for me to say this was absolutely the same engine, the same game, the same assets, the same details. Now there does look to be some artistic changes here. The car itself certainly is more rusty, more diffused. There's less specular on there and less reflectance, but that's not consistent with the downgrade. There's actually a change. The lighting is also a slightly different colour, and there's more lights. You can see there's more lights casting from outside in, so that bounce light, the GI there, is actually coming from the outside in, which wasn't present in the original E3 demo. You can see the side of the car doesn't really reflect it as much, and that's a change. As is the light changes around Ellie herself. You can see object materials, Ellie herself, the back of her head, the bag, it's much lighter and brighter, and that's for gameplay reasons. Now that's not to say that everything's a positive. There has been a reduction, I think, in the lighting accuracy and the cost. That per pixel cost of light and the volumetrics have been reduced from that E3 2018 demo, and I believe that is for performance reasons. And the animated alpha effect of the fire and the bloom around the fire is pared back quite significantly. But other than that, the specular reflectance on the floor and the difference in the objects and the details, it's not a huge difference, and it's very close to the original one here, which I've tried to line up as much as I can with the attacks. The quality of the models is the biggest difference, and that's really because the models in the game in this demonstration were actually the same as the ones from the cinematics. They look like full cinematic models with the associated lighting models, animations, and the increase in the shader complexity and the model geometry count. Those are the biggest changes I'm seeing from the original reveal in E3 2018 and the one here. They have certainly reduced the model quality, and that's simply because this was all playing out like a scripted real-time cinematics. What I said back then is what I'm saying now. And this of course means it's real gameplay, but it's recorded in the engine and then played back like a cinematic with the relevant ramp up in effects, visual quality in materials and geometry and shader effects, due to the fact that it doesn't have to worry about the dynamic element of gameplay. It only expects to see 2 characters, not 5, which may happen when you're playing in real life. And again, there are other changes. You can see here there's a spotlight pointing directly onto Ellie here, which is showing her area, and you can see shadows casting across her body. It's not present in the demonstration, and that's clearly because for playing the game, you want to be able to see what you're doing, your character's doing. This is a good example of all changes are made for various reasons. This is a gameplay one, and arguably could be classed as an upgrade like many other elements, such as the additional foliage, the animation, and the post effects are actually better, such as the motion blur. But here you can see the character model reduction, the reduction in shader quality and geometry, and normal maps such as have reduced it. And the animation here when he gets shot is not quite the same. It is physics based, so it does react differently when you shoot different people, but I'm not going to get hung up on one single animation. But here's a good shot to see the improvement in the lighting quality, the accuracy, the global illumination improvements, the material improvements, and the overall ambience and atmosphere is much better in the newer version than the old one, because they've lightened it, brightened it, and changed that look. But here you can see the animation routine. Hard one to get this was, so just notice the same death animation. She gets shot by her enemy, it hits her in the chest, she dies, and Ellie looks at her twice as if like she's just been killed, and then looks ahead twice, lowers her to the floor, and then pushes her away as she runs over the side. All that is present. Another sequence here where the guy was lying dead in the shot, which I said at the time was going to be a gameplay mechanic. It was. You can retrieve arrows when they're shot in people's heads. But you can see he's still here, he's still dead, and you can still retrieve arrows from him and he slumps to the side. It's not quite the same animation retrieval as it was in the demonstration, but it's the same model, albeit not quite as detailed as we've already covered on previous models. And all the other motion matched animation routines, you can see here as Ellie smacks the hammer into his face and he slumps over and dies. Here I've managed to match that up. Another point in the title, you can see the same animation. The bad guy at the end when he's attacking you and he swings his axe or throws you over the counter, that's there. He can also throw you through the glass, that smashes Ellie through it. You can destroy the scenery when he swings his axe, he knocks things off. You knock things off, so the interaction is there. It's not quite as good, it's not quite as embedded, but some of that might be bugs, some of that might be the fact they've tried to reduce it. All these different areas, in fact, even getting him to grab you all depends on which side of the counter you stand where he swings his axe. And obviously the big one is the final end of killing the guy and downing him and then taking him to head off with a machete. And again, that's in. You can do it, kill him with the machete equipped, and the same animation routine kicks in, and it looks pretty close in terms of the routines and the animation sets as that original E3 demo.
May the current be calm. Only 1 week.
But again, that was a real-time cinematic with all the relevant increases in geometry, character models, and then just not present here because it's really just a gameplay section with the camera controlled, and that shows. And overall, the shop itself has been changed enough to notice some of the post-processing effects and reductions across the board. The way the game plays out, the combat and the hunting mechanism, it's not quite as good as it is here, even on some of the harder sections, but you can get almost the same kind of impact and hunting sections as you see in this title. And this includes the call-outs, the names, and all the areas where you're hiding and they lose sight of you. This happens throughout the game all the time. It is dynamic, it is consistent. You can get elements like that in the title. You can blow people up with arrows, you can smash people in the head with the machete. Again, here I've managed to match that up by jumping down. There's so much more in the title that I'm not seeing any element in this game where the animation routine was a lie compared to what they showed in that demo. And the blends, that motion matching that they've used, it's definitely present and it's definitely as good as they promised. There are a couple of points where it jumps between blends, not as well as the demo, but that's what scripting does for you. And I think that naturally brings this video to a close. I hope it wasn't too long and I hope it was useful. And the question obviously that everyone's still waiting probably to be answered by me is, was the game downgraded? And I say no, because a downgrade to me comes from something such as Alien vs Predator, Anthem, and of course Watch Dogs. But unlike many of those titles, it delivers on its promise almost perfectly. Aside from visual reductions in some of the character models, the geometry, and the shader work in the real-time gameplay, everything else is pretty much identical. The geometry, the areas in terms of the scenery is actually better, and there's more interaction at certain points, and certainly a lot more in the game that didn't demonstrate there, and some improvements that I've covered already. Visually, it has taken some cutbacks in terms of performance and delivering on the hardware it was targeted for, the PS4 and the Pro. And not every change is a performance one. Some of them are artistic, so there is a level here you have to balance between the two, and those improvements also weigh in. Optimization is a standard process for any software work, specifically in video games, and this is something Naughty Dog do on a daily basis, and they will always do along with many other teams, and they're hardly the first to do it, and they sure as hell won't be the last of us. Anyway, that's it. Hopefully you'll join me back for more look at The Last of Us 2 where I go in detail on the whole engine, but for now I'm out and I'll catch you on the next one.